Weeds was
A
in the way.
unicorn. It
Or-
needs to go in now, right? It's
Yeah.
temporary.
So we'll
I thought you put it in.
Please.
so we'll be looking at one of the first acts that Jesus does. So after his ministry gets started, we're going to see what one of his first acts is, and this is a pretty long chapter, and it's again, it sort of tells you who Jesus is without really telling you who Jesus is. You ever heard that expression, tell me who Jesus is, or tell me what you do without really telling me what you do? So this is sort of what we get from this particular text. So we're going to do 21 to 45, right? So, all right, so who would like to read?
Did the wrong one.
That's okay. So it'll be 21 to 45. So how about we do 10 verses for the first one? And the C word is Capernaum. So just so you know
I
what
was
that
always
is.
looking at that.
If you want to know what that is. So,
I can start.
okay.
They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath day came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as a scribe. Just then there was in the synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent, and come out of him." And the unclean spirit convulsed him and cried with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority?" He commanded even the unclean spirit, and they obey him. At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them.
And how about we go through, let me see what the next part. How about we go through 39?
At evening, when the sun had set, they brought to him all who were sick and who were demon-possessed. And the whole city was gathered together at the door. Then he healed many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons. And he did not allow the demons to speak, because they knew him, preaching in Galilee. Now in the morning, having risen a long while before daylight, he went out and departed to a solitary place, and there he prayed. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is looking for you." But he said to them, "Let us go into the next town, that I may preach there also, because for this purpose I have come forth." And he was preaching in their synagogues throughout all of Galilee, casting out demons. Jesus cleanses a leper.
So who likes to read us 40 through 45?
A man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus was indignant. He reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said. "Be clean." Immediately the leprosy left him, and he was cleansed. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. "See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. As a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere.
Okay. Perfect. All right. So what did this? So the important thing as we look at this. So this is the first part of Jesus' ministry. So what's the first thing that Mark wants us to know about Jesus?
He's not like any other
prophet or person before him
Yep.
could do some of this stuff. He did it more with authority and greater.
Correct.
And he was at the synagogue.
Yep, he was at the synagogue. What was he doing at the synagogue? Teaching. So he was teaching at the synagogue. So this is what Mark is introducing us to Jesus. So the first thing that Jesus' ministry does is he's teaching. He's teaching at the synagogue. And the interesting thing about Mark, what is Jesus teaching?
About himself, really.
We don't know. We honestly don't know. That's the thing. He's teaching with having authority, but we actually don't know what he's teaching.
I've heard said many times that Jesus is by far the best teacher or preacher that there ever was.
Absolutely.
Many times I've heard that
Yeah.
said.
And so it's interesting that Mark doesn't tell us what Jesus was talking about. Don't you find that interesting? You know, the first thing in his ministry, the thing that we get to learn about Jesus the most, and we don't know anything. We don't know what Jesus preached about. We don't know what he taught about. We just know he taught with authority. So I thought that was really interesting. That makes it even more exciting, because you're like, well, what was he teaching? What was he saying that people were just like freaking out about?
It's hard for us to say that though, because we know.
Well,
I mean,
we do and we don't. We don't know what he said. Was
Yeah.
it the golden rule that he talked about right then? Was it about the relationship between him and the Father? Was it, the relationship between people? What was he talking about? And so,
Was it the same as the Sermon on the Mount?
yeah, it could have been the Sermon on the Mount he could have done. So, I mean, we don't know. And it's really interesting that Mark doesn't tell us that. And so, all we know is what he taught. Whatever he taught, people were generally impressed by. And they're like, holy cow, I can't believe he said something like that. Or, so it's really interesting that Mark says that. And then, and he taught with authority. So the scribes, the way to think of scribes now is to think of rabbis. So the scribes' role in Jewish culture at this time is very much what rabbis' role in the Jewish culture is right now. And so rabbis talk about stuff and they cite stuff, they're very much, so Jesus was talking differently than what the scribes were talking about. So, and then, so he's in the midst of his teaching and preaching and stuff like that. And then what happens?
And with unclean spirit.
In the middle of a synagogue. So in the middle of one of the holy places.
How do you get past all the guards?
I don't know. He got in though. He got in. And so you have somebody who has an unclean spirit in church, or in their case in the temple or in the synagogue at this particular point in time. And so it's interesting that this encounter is happening in a holy place like this. So again, I think it's interesting that this is what's happening. So in a holy place, Jesus is talking to this guy. And I think the other thing interesting too is that just Jesus telling the spirit to leave is enough to get the spirit to leave. Because if you watch any of the exorcisms or anything like that now, there's a whole complete ritual you got to go through. It's not very often that you speak the name and the spirit leaves. But Jesus has such power in his teaching and such power in who he is that Jesus just says, be gone, and the spirit is gone. The spirit is compelled to leave. There is no back and forth. It's just like gone. And so I think that's an interesting thing about, so we know about Jesus is that evil doesn't have a place when Jesus is around. So when Jesus is present, evil is not. And so that's another interesting thing to think about. This is who Mark is describing Jesus to be. Where evil is present, the evil cannot bear to be with Jesus because of who Jesus is. Yep.
When you're referring to evil, you're talking about Satan.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
holy Satan.
Yep. Satan, powers of evil,
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff. When Jesus is present, evil cannot be present. And so that's, I think, a very interesting thing that Mark is saying. So that when Jesus is there, And that shows you again, so when we read like Revelation at the end, we always wonder, well, is it true from the perspective that good, when we look at the theme of Revelation, good will conquer evil at the end. And now you have a way to see that scripturally in text that good does conquer evil, because Jesus comes in, just says, get out, and there's no fight. You notice that? There's no fight. Spirit doesn't say, I'm going to stay in here forever. No, there's nothing like that. It's like, okay, I got to leave. And so you see the power, the authority of who Jesus is around the forces of evil. So,
And the news spread quickly.
as it always does in Mark.
But the rabbis didn't recognize him, but the evil spirits recognized him immediately.
Thank you for using Marconian language when you said that. So Mark is really good at saying immediately. So if you as we read through this, you're going to hear this all the time. Immediately, or at once, or Mark is really much about that. So any other questions about that particular part of the text? Let's see. I am going to read you a little bit out of Douglas Hare's commentary about talking about the scribes and Jesus in terms of their authority, what he was getting at. Because Mark does not tell us why the scribes taught without authority, we must infer it from context. He is not referring to the style of their teaching. The scribes appropriately supported their ruling by citing precedents and earlier opinions, not by claiming unmediated authority, but rather to the absence of ecclesiastical power, whereas the scribes occupied themselves with decisions about what was permitted and what was not permitted in a business-as-usual world. Jesus was powerfully announcing the arrival of God's kingdom. What is new about Jesus' teaching is that it communicates the end-time power of God. It is with authority because it is authorized by God. So Jesus is saying his words, or that teaching, with it isn't a I'm trying to think of it. It isn't like a book report that he's citing. Yeah, in Leviticus it says this. He's talking about real world things, and he's talking with the power of God, and that the kingdom of God is here, not somewhere else. The kingdom of God has broken in. So that's one way you can look at that type of authority. So
I've heard that the rabbis always referenced the previous rabbis.
correct.
So, if they studied under Paul, and I'm just saying what Paul said.
Yep.
And he said what Gary said.
Right. So
Jesus is saying, this is what I say.
right. And this is what God says. So this is why we say, yeah. So Mark introduces us again to this, reminds us that Jesus is here and that Jesus allows us to conquer, or Jesus being there conquers evil. So that's one thing we know about Jesus. So that no evil spirits can be around God. Evil is not present when Jesus is present. And then we get to the next part. And as soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew. Actually, they found that, archaeological-wise, that Simon and Andrew's house was right next to that particular synagogue where they started at. So it actually is, they did walk right basically into the house. It was like walking across the street here, going to where the old parsonage was at. They just walk right in. So, and then so now I want to get your thoughts on this part of the text 30 and 31, because some people don't really like this. So now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. What do you guys think?
Yeah, what was the purpose of that story to begin with?
This story.
This
Just-
one. I mean, the fever broke?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did he say that because she was so darn well that she served them, or a reference that that's what she was supposed to do? That she
Well,
Yeah, I
was, I
don't
mean,
know.
you had some able-bodied
What, yeah,
guys there.
what is the purpose of this story? Why did he put this in here?
yeah.
It's,
So
it's
why?
not like big stuff like casting out the demons and stuff. It's just like.
And also
fever-
notice
fever
who's
broke.
and who's not named in this text.
The mother-in-law.
The mother.
The mother-in-law.
She's just Simon's mother-in-law.
Jesus, Simon's mother-in-law. I can tell you how Evelyn likes it when everybody calls her Harry's sister. She does not like that. Don't call her Harry's sister, because she gets a little angry when people do that. Exactly. So you get a little bit of that in this text. You don't. So the interesting thing about Mark is there's a lot of female characters within the book of Mark that are not named. However, they do have some very important roles within the book of Mark. And so, why do you think Mark included this thing about lifting of the fever? What does that say about it? So it goes. So again, whenever Mark is putting something in here, you have to ask yourself, what does this say about Jesus? What does it say about Jesus that the fever was lifted as soon as he lifted her out of bed?
Did she recognize him as who he
Maybe,
as he was?
maybe.
He shows his power.
He can do anything.
Yep, shows his power. Shows that he's got.
You could do simple things as
Yeah.
well as.
So he can simple things of releasing evil from the world, or healing a fever. So it shows you that Jesus has control over the supernatural realm as well as the natural realm. So you have two, and these stories are like butted up against each other. So it's not like 4 paragraphs down or 5 stories later you hear this. So Mark is telling you right now. So this is who Jesus is. Jesus is someone who has authority over the supernatural, so evil cannot be present when Jesus says, be gone. And that anything natural that Jesus wants to, needs to be done or needs to move on, that it also bends to Jesus' will. And so the woman is healed. And so so Mark has set that up for you. So now going forward, if there is a situation where there is evil, Jesus is just going to say, be gone, and, things are going to change. Or if there's a natural circumstance that happens, whether it be someone sick or someone dying, Jesus can change that because Jesus has power over the natural realm as well, too. So in some sense, it gives you really much, it's a big spoiler. He's spoiling it. So you should know who Jesus is for the rest of the whole Gospel of Mark. These things should happen. So as you go through here, you've been set up. You have the setup right now with these 2 passages. As we do this in writing, you have setup and payoff. If you think of this as a screenplay, or if you think of this as a work of a story, you have the setup where Jesus is able to do all this. And so when any of this happens anywhere in the Gospel of Mark, you should not be surprised. Oh, of course he's going to do this because we've seen this before. So. But again, the part that...
Controversy is that she began to serve them.
Correct. Correct.
You knew that was coming.
She served them.
Oh,
Why is that controversial?
Not in those days, but
But he makes a point of
Now?
mentioning it.
He makes a point of mentioning it, but also it could be controversial. I think it's more controversial now.
no, yeah.
Because she just got up out of her sick bed.
Yeah,
Give her a minute, come on.
get up and start serving me.
James,
I
are you
don't
saying
see
where's,
I don't see it as her
Where's
being
my
told to do it. But that was the role of women in those days. And to me, it's just showing that she was completely healthy.
Yep.
There was no residual.
Grateful.
And it was her voluntary response.
And so
Well,
I will even add to this is that this is what we're supposed to do. The women in Mark tell us men especially, this is how you're supposed to act. Louise, I cut you off.
I was gonna say that he had passion or feelings, or, I don't mean feelings, but for her, I mean, I don't mean feelings as an individual, but feelings for Simon's mother-in-law.
Correct. Right. He was a friend of his. He wanted
Yeah.
to make sure she was healed. Actually, yes. Absolutely. But yeah. So take it, especially when you read the book of Mark and you see something happens to a woman. That's how things are supposed to happen. The guys are supposed to act the same way. So it's very much women are teaching men how to act within the Christian faith. They still do. Thank you, Marvel. They still do, and they do a wonderful job at that. So yeah. So I think it's
Back then, I bet, they weren't treated very well.
No.
And they're
no.
treated as a down lower.
Exactly. So, but yeah, I want you to see that though in the text that
Yeah.
this is important because it really shows. So, and I think Don put it well, is that this is her response to this healing. Her response is to get up and serve. It's not to thank you, Jesus, and be gone, but it's I need to serve now because Jesus has healed me. Jesus has shown me the way, and all I can help to do is to serve. So I want you to, especially as we go through the Gospel of Mark, when you see a woman do something, take notice, because this is what Mark really wants all of us to do. So thank you, ladies, for being a good example for us. So
Not like the leper who was told, don't be blabbing your mouth, and he goes and blabs his mouth.
yeah, well, we'll get to that because that's another interesting story as well too. So
So we as modern women want her to have been treated nicer and say, hey, sit in the chair and
yeah,
have something to eat before
Simon and
you
Andrew
get
will
up
or
and
something
do
to drink.
stuff again.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, but I
But-
can see why that comes up.
Yeah, so like I said, that's what Mark wants all of us to do, especially the guys. Get off your butts. When Jesus does something for you, do something back. I mean, this is the
Funny
call.
he didn't put immediately. And served them immediately.
Then the fever left her, and she began. Yeah, it's true. She should have put in immediately just for fun. So now here's a couple interesting things about. So we know that Jesus is the Messiah. Well, at least that's what Mark is saying. But here's something interesting about the Messiah. When the Messiah came, was the Messiah known for healing people? Was that the expectation?
No, I think they want him to be the king.
He wanted to be the king, exactly. The Messiah's role in Jewish literature is not to be a healer,
Not to be a servant.
not to be a servant. So Jesus is throwing that role of being a Messiah on its head. So they're not, people when they see him as a Messiah is not expecting him to heal. This is not, because we know what King David did when he took back Jerusalem, and he slaughtered all the lame and the ill and stuff like that to make a point, because when he was trying to take the city again, they said, well, the infirm and the ill and the elderly can defend the city. We don't need to do that. Well, David took exception to that, and I don't think he did well, but he went in and basically made a point by killing all those people. But Jesus, on the other hand, is coming in and saying, I'm going to heal people. That is God's mission. So that's an interesting thing to look at that as well too. Another interesting thing that I learned about in this one was Jesus was remembered as a magician in later Jewish literature because of his ability to heal people. And we know that these stories are true because, again, for the Jewish folks, they weren't looking for this. And so when they talk about Jesus healing people, they have no dog in the fight. They don't really care. While us as Christians, we reflect on that. Oh yeah, that's who Jesus is. This is how we see the Son of God and stuff like that. So you know that Jesus was a healer when Jesus was alive because of the stories from the Jewish folks. They're saying, yep, he healed people. We don't know how he did it, but he did. So that's another interesting thing to look at as we look at that too. Then we run to 35. In the morning while it was still dark, Jesus does what?
Got up.
Right.
He goes out and prays. And this is different than what Jewish people would normally do. So how often do you think Jews would, back in Jesus' time, would normally go out and pray? Or will have prayer time? How many times a day?
Every 3 hours.
A little less than that.
11
3,
o'clock.
6, 9, 12.
So how often would they be praying?
3 times?
3 times a day. 3 times a day they
Morning.
pray. Morning, afternoon, and evening. But Jesus went to pray long before he was required to pray. So Jesus went off to pray.
It was still dark.
Oh, it's still dark. Yep. So,
Of course, that's 7:30.
yeah. Exactly. And he went to a deserted place. You know, he didn't go back to the temple. He went to a deserted place, which reminds you of what did we learn about where did Jesus go last time?
It reminds me of Gethsemane.
Reminds you to a deserted place.
No, wait.
Well, I mean,
He went into the wilderness.
he went in the wilderness to pray. So from last week, he went into the wilderness to pray. So again, he's doing this thing of going back to the wilderness to pray. So that's something interesting as well too, because that is also a reference to what in Jewish history, with the people of Israel were in exile for how many years again? 40 years. They were wandering in the wilderness, that type of stuff. So you have this inference again that Jesus goes back to that time. It's a reminder to people that Jesus is still sort of sensing what God wants him to do and stuff like that. So, and then of course Simon and his companions hunt him down. Everyone is searching for you. And again, they sort of miss the point. You know, they don't ask Jesus, "What are you praying about today?" Everybody's looking for you. And again, Jesus goes back to preaching. This is what Jesus was. I'm to proclaim the message here also. And so Jesus' message is about preaching and teaching and healing. So that's one of the reasons why we have the word in our service, right? The reason why we have preaching is because this is what Jesus did. Jesus was preaching. And so that's why on a Sunday morning you have a lot of preaching. Well, not a lot, depending where you go. Some places you might have a lot of preaching, but
As much as we will allow.
there you go, as much as we will allow. So, yeah, there's some places where you get an hour and a half sermon. So, I think that's,
Africa.
yeah, you do.
Gloria tells about going to church all afternoon.
Exactly.
Not Hammond. A different Trinity.
So, but yeah, I mean, so you have so if you're wondering why do we have preaching as part of our service, that's one of the reasons why, because Jesus' mission was to preach. And so, as pastors, as lay folks, as whoever the case, who's ever doing the preaching, that's the reason why it's part of service. So, and then we get to everybody's favorite leper. So. So again, what are some of as you read this story, what are some of the points that really stand out to you about this interaction?
Jesus touched him.
Why is that a big deal?
Not supposed to touch.
Why aren't you supposed to touch them?
Not supposed
It's
to.
contagious.
It's contagious.
Become unclean by the
Unclean.
rules of the Jewish rules.
Yep. Yep. So has any of you guys ever watch, I'm trying to remember, Ben-Hur? All right.
Long time ago.
Yeah. So they actually do a good job of sort of showing you what happens to lepers. In the latter part of the movies, there is basically a community that lives in a cave. They're away from society. They can't raise their own food. You can't be near anybody. You are excluded from everybody around you. So the leper is suffering twofold. He's suffering physically as well as socially because he can't be around people. And so when Jesus touches him, Jesus is saying you are just not more than just healed, you are invited back into the community, which is why his next words is go show yourself to the priest, because that'll get you back into the community graces. But Jesus is not scared to touch him, and how do we know that Jesus is not going to be scared doing that? What was our setup before? What was our setup before to tell us that Jesus is not going to be scared of any disease?
He of the fever.
He took care of the fever. We know any natural process Jesus is not going to be scared of. So we already know. This is a no-brainer for the audience to know that Jesus is going to come in and he's going to take care of that disease just like that, because we already have the setup for that. He already came in, took care of a flu. He wasn't even worried about that. He took her hand. Yep, you're done. Same thing with this. Touch, done. You know, he's been healed. So Jesus isn't even worried about that sort of stuff. So we see, so as we're going through again, you should, expectations. Somebody's got leprosy. Somebody's got a fever. Somebody's got anything natural wrong with them. Jesus is like, I don't care. We'll get you fixed up and get you moved on. Just like ER.
It reminds me of the AIDS when it first came out.
AIDS.
No one would touch it.
Yeah. Or any of the, or even think COVID.
COVID.
When that came out, you know, how we acted with people with that, or how we still act with people around that.
At least 6 feet away.
At least 6 feet away. So
10,000 have died since last November from
wow.
COVID. Couldn't believe that this morning.
Yeah, it's not good stuff. So like I said, as you think about this particular text, again, it shouldn't surprise us. So Jesus is welcoming the person back socially as well as physically. So those are pretty neat things to do. Now, Louise, when you read that text, I thought it was funny, or I thought it was interesting. So verse 41, how many people were moved with compassion or pity? How many people were Jesus was indignant?
I have moved with pity.
Okay, moved with pity,
I have compassion.
compassion.
So is mine the only one indignant?
I had moved with pity. Who else had something? What else did you have?
Pity. Yeah,
Pity?
'cause I was confused about the indignant. I didn't know.
That's,
I didn't read.
doesn't mean
I
pity,
didn't
does it?
think pity and indignant were in the same.
Okay, so the Greek word there means more towards indignant. It's leaning more towards that indignant. So why would Jesus be indignant at the guy? Or is Jesus indignant at something else?
Did he know he was gonna not do what he was told?
Well, maybe.
The guy asked him, you know, if you want to, if you will, I can be made clean. So it's like he was afraid Jesus didn't want to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's that. Also, look at how, so we just talked about COVID, you're being 6 feet apart. How does the leper approach Jesus?
The same way the unclean spirit guy got in the synagogue.
Well, and then look and how
They're
close.
pretty brave, I
Yeah,
think.
and how close is the leper to Jesus?
Falls on his knees right before him.
Right before him. So he's not obeying any of the standard protocols of the day. The leper is just like, I'm gonna get right in Jesus' face and say, I need help. I can't do this. And so,
They're brave, have courage,
yeah.
or faith.
Indignant feeling or showing anger
Yeah.
or annoyance at what is perceived as unfair treatment.
Yeah.
What is that?
So why is Jesus potentially feeling this way? Why is Jesus feeling indignant? Is he mad at the leper?
Society.
Yeah, Jesus is mad at society. Jesus is mad that they separated this man away from society, that his life is basically have been over since he had leprosy, that he's not able to do anything, be around anybody. He's shunted to being lonely, and everybody's okay with that. And so when Jesus sees this happens, Jesus is like, this isn't right. You know, how can we send this person away? Why are we treating somebody like that? Why are we treating one of God's children as if they don't matter, that they don't belong? And so I think that's the reason why Jesus is upset.
There still is leprosy
Yeah.
in the world,
Oh,
correct?
they-
I'd be
yeah.
quite upset
Yeah.
with all of us.
You don't hear anything about it.
Yeah.
You
I
do
don't
it
even know.
occasionally. You do so, but then the bigger question then for us, since Mark wrote that, what's he trying to tell us as the audience? Are we,
The same way.
should we do this? Who are we separating out from us? You know,
You'll have COVID.
yeah, those who have COVID,
The homeless.
the homeless, the hungry. How often do we separate, or how easy it is for us to separate? Or you could say if you're a Democratic family, the Republicans, or if you're a Republican family, the Democrats. I mean, how do we go about separating ourselves out? And Jesus is saying, no, this is not right. We need to come together and love one another. And so I think that is a challenge to that first century audience that's listening to this. So, so how do you feel about that?
Well, that's an eye opener. I mean, that explains it to me, because I'm like, why would Jesus be indignant towards that man? But it's not the man, it's how he was being treated.
Right. And so it comes back on ourselves, because a lot of times we, especially as churches, we don't do a really good job of helping out the homeless, the foodless, name your audience. And so how do we as Christians respond to this text would be something I think that Mark is challenging the people around him as well too. This is what Jesus did. This is why, and that's why he used that particular word, indignant, even though a lot of translators will translate it with pity, moved with pity, but Jesus isn't moved with pity, he's pissed. He's like, why are you guys not fixing this? Why is this situation happening to this person? What can we do about it? And so I'm going to heal him. There you go. So what else about this particular text? Let's see what that was.
He sternly charged him
Mm-hmm.
and sent him away at once.
And so here's the other question I have for you. Why doesn't Jesus want people to know?
That's what I was wondering.
Why does Jesus not want people to know? Because we don't hear anything at the beginning of the when Jesus was coming out of the, after being baptized, and God said, keep it quiet. I don't remember God telling Jesus that. Why is Jesus not wanting people to know?
Well, he could never go to a place alone again. I mean,
That's true. That's true.
The timing wasn't right yet.
Yep. Timing wasn't right. And in particular, what timing are you thinking of?
That people would become so large in following him that the Roman officials needed to crucify him because of
it's
the
kind of
Jewish
like
leaders.
Simone Biles in Green Bay and Taylor Swift in Kansas City. They're, they can't go and be private at all.
Correct.
I mean, it's
Yeah, like somebody from Green Bay is married to
Simone Biles.
Biles,
Yeah.
on Parade 7.
I think
That
that
really
Jesus
is.
didn't want to be just known for being a healer. I think he wanted to tell more of his true message.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than being a healer,
That he is the Messiah, not a,
Yep.
because that's what people were following him for. Was
yeah.
to be healed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So who is? So it gets us to. Mark is asking us the question then: who is Jesus? Who is this Jesus guy? Is he a healer? Is he just a healer? And your answer to that question would be
no.
no. And why? Because what's the first thing that Jesus does? You can go back to the beginning. What he preaches? Yes, he preaches. The first thing he does in the synagogue, he's preaching and teaching. And so that's the message that Jesus wants to get out there. However, we just had these two stories 3 stories of Jesus sort of healing people. And so then people are going to get confused. He's got this great message, he's got this great teaching, but what people see is healing, 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 healing. And like, well, he's a healer, he's not a preacher. And so that's what Jesus is really trying to get at them, saying, okay, this is my mission, this is who I am, and stuff like that. So. So, it also, this last part of the text, 40 to 45, also brings up something that, Karen, I thought you would bring up. It asks a big question. Because we talked about healing, healing, healing. And the leper says, do you choose me to be healed? And Jesus says, I choose. So what's the implication for that then? Why did you have a job, Karen?
Oh, so all the physicians won't have a job anymore.
Exactly. Exactly. So if the case was we just would go before Jesus and God and say, hey, I need to be healed, bam, you get healed, we wouldn't need physicians, we wouldn't need nurses, we wouldn't need any of that type of stuff. So then the question comes, what if I ask God to be healed and I'm not healed? What does that mean? So what do you guys think?
What was the question? You said, what if I ask Jesus to be healed
And then you're not healed.
and you're not healed?
God has a different plan.
Yeah.
He works through the physicians. That's what it does.
And heal is much more than just physical.
Ah. It is. But it's really hard too when that physical part doesn't happen. And so you'll see a lot of people, you'll see a lot of skeptics will turn to this text and say, look, Jesus healed all these people, why won't Jesus heal you? You know, you can easily look at this text and say that. If Jesus is all powerful, Jesus can do all this stuff, and Jesus doesn't heal you, what kind of God is that?
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
And what's
Why?
the answer?
yeah. It's a great question. Why? Why doesn't Jesus do that? Why doesn't Jesus heal all the time?
He heals through physicians
He heals through physicians, yep.
and nurses.
But-
It's a medical field.
It's the sin of the world.
Sin of the
Or
world?
mercy of
Yeah.
Yeah, we just watched something the other night here. Remember that? Somebody was asking him, why does God allow, like murders to happen, everything else?
Yeah.
Where's your God then, you
Yeah.
know? And no, that's sin. That's man's problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's not God. He gave us the free choice to decide
Correct.
right from wrong.
Correct.
But then when it strikes
more
a child,
personal.
that's really,
Yeah.
you know, a child is
Yeah.
innocent,
Yeah.
basically, of
But they still
sin, but they still live in a sinful world.
So these are the
But it's more
That's
personal.
tough. Ooh.
What's
I don't care
more
about you guys. I want to know, why isn't God healing me?
correct.
So that goes back to what Don said. God has other plans for you, and we don't know what that plan is right now. We don't
Right.
understand it.
Or being selfish.
God does have a plan for everybody, though.
I don't
'Cause that is our
remember what it
Creator.
is,
Mhm.
but Jesus didn't heal everyone who came to him either.
Correct. That's the other thing too. Jesus did not heal everybody. And we also just talked about what was Jesus' mission on the world. Was Jesus' mission to be a healer? No. Jesus' mission was to preach. Did Jesus heal? Absolutely. But that was not what his primary focus was, which again was the reason why he told the leper, don't say anything, because I don't want everybody to come to me for healing, because I'm not here I'm not a slot machine. You know, you're not going to pull my arm and whatever healing miracle comes out, that'll be it. You know, Jesus is like, that's not what God is. God is not a slot machine. We can't just pull the arm and say, okay, yeah, God, give me this, this, and that. So.
I want to preach.
Mm-hmm.
And he casts out many demons. There's a lot of people with demons, it sounded like. But he also didn't want the demons to speak either.
Correct. I think this particular commentary, this is by Lamar Williamson Jr., has an interesting take on this particular question. However, to state the gospel of this passage, and he's talking about 40 to 45, in such a way is immediately to raise a serious theological and practical problem. If the ministry of Jesus on earth was the revelation of the will of God, and he willed the leper to heal this leper who came to him, why does he not always heal those in faith seeking his healing touch? Human experience makes it evident that either God cannot always do as he will, or else God does not always will healing, at least not the time and the way that we beg for it. Both experience and the text suggest that perhaps we have created the problem by stating the premise wrongly. We wish to hear God always wills healing, but this is justified neither by Scripture nor by life. If this affirmation were true, the ultimate arbiter of events would be our will, not God's. The present text, however, affirms the lordship of Jesus Christ, I will, and it appears in the gospel in which Jesus himself at the crucial hour makes a prayer reminiscent of the leopard. Father, all things are possible to thee, yet not what I will, but what thou wilt. The healing of the leper must be interpreted finally in the light of Jesus' own submission to the will of God. Though the passage does not resolve the theological problem it raises, it does illuminate the terrains for peoples confronted by a struggle with unrelieved illness and the problem of prayer unanswered or denied. So what he's saying out of that is, if God's healing was, Karen, I think you put it well, are we being selfish because we always want me, and not what God wants, you know? Part of life is struggle and suffering. That's part of life. We all struggle, we all suffer. Is that a bad thing? What do you guys think? Is suffering and struggle bad things?
When you're going through it, yeah.
Absolutely there. It's absolutely when you're going through it.
But if you come out on the other side and things are better and you look back, then you can understand.
Right.
But when you're
in the midst of it, it sucks.
Yeah.
It really sucks. But yeah, so that's part of that struggle and suffering, is that that's how we as people learn and grow, is in the suffering, it's in the struggle. We don't always learn the right things, we don't always do the right things, but suffering and struggle helps shape us into who we are and helps us to see God a little bit more plainly in our lives. So
Hopefully to appreciate the good times and
yes,
to appreciate the blessings of every day.
The problem is that there's some people that are just stuck in that and
Yeah.
don't learn and grow.
Yeah, there's people who are stuck, and there's people who don't learn, and so, but that's where we also get free will, where you always have the ability to look at stuff the way that you want to look at them, because bad things are going to happen to every one of us. That's the fact of life. How we perceive those events and deal with those events is how we see God in our lives. I'm not saying bad things are great. I'm not going, woohoo, yeah, this bad thing happened to me today. I'm so excited. You know, we don't do that, but we also know that that's not, because we had our setup and payoff earlier in the text. We know that Jesus conquers evil. We know that Jesus will conquer all natural diseases, processes, and death, and all that other sort of stuff. We know that from the beginning of the text. But do we live that way? And that's what the Gospel of Mark is asking you. You know what's going to happen. He spoiled the whole rest of the Gospel of Mark for you. But we don't believe it. So each time a new miracle happens, we're like, wow, that's great. He told you at the beginning. He told you in chapter 1. this is what's going to happen. But we're in chapter 9. Hey, this is happening. This is great. You know, it's we know that, but we don't believe that. So, anything else about the text? Otherwise, we'll be.
So why did this leper go off blabbing after Jesus sternly told him, keep your mouth shut?
Well, wouldn't you too?
Somebody who had healed me of my.
I don't think, I think he
Okay,
was
I'll do whatever you
overjoyed
say.
Yeah.
and clean and not
I would be-
isolated anymore. He could not contain
I guess it
himself.
Yes.
depends on the person.
He's
I'm
yeah.
gonna keep my mouth shut. I'll keep my mouth shut.
Well, it's hard too because
And
you've
some
been.
do better than
Yeah.
others too.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, she evidently doesn't.
No secrets for you.
I'm clean. I can touch you.
And that's the
Neither
excitement.
did it.
That's exciting. That's the excitement. Yeah, to go from a state where you can't be around people to suddenly be a. Just think if you were isolated in your house, or just think of after COVID. You know, after we were able to come
After
together,
those 2
people were
years that we were-
yeah, people were
Oh,
excited to
that's
come.
right.
Oh, last week.
Jeff Pollock lost his dad.
Yeah,
And people came out for Christmas this year.
yeah, yeah. We had the
How many
biggest.
people, it wasn't just COVID that killed them, it was isolation.
Yeah, yeah.
They used
Isolation.
that.
Yeah,
They couldn't.
you couldn't go see people. So yeah. So where are we at next week? Chapter 2. So yeah. So just any other questions though? Like I said, Mark already has ruined the rest of Mark for you. So if you come by the next miracle and you're like, well, I'm really shocked that happened. He already told you. He already told you. This is what's going to happen. So he doesn't even give you a spoiler alert.
You don't have to turn to the last chapter to find out.
Exactly. You already know. You already know how it ends. You know, he told you up front. He's and
Don't you, when you read a book, look ahead?
yeah.
Never, never.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I did the other night. Great big thick book, and I thought.
You're as bad as me.
Here, who's it?
Or Jane.
No, never, ever.
Oh, she reads the end first.
No,
She gets a movie, has to read what the movie's about before. I already know what the movie's about.
All right. We'll head on to prayers.